All right, we're back here at the Casual GM Podcast. I'm your host, Drew, and alongside me, as always, our co-host, Mike. Mike, how are you?
Just as handsome as ever, Drew. How are you?
It's really true. So, well, this week we're going to jump into our news around the NFL segment just real briefly because we're limiting ourselves to 1 hour. We're going to try something different here on the podcast, and we're going to see if we can cram the same amount of content that we usually do in about 2 hours into a single hour. So wish us luck. So first thing I wanted to talk about this week, Mike, is Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
Today is the first day the NFL is scheduled to host its new format on hearings on player misconduct. And so ESPN did a little thing on the radio this morning about it. And it sounds like they copied almost like jury trial formatting.
Oh, really?
And that is how they're going to determine if he was wrong, and if so, how egregiously. And so there's going to be, from what I understand, someone arguing the case against and the case for Deshaun Watson. And then that group, that committee, or that whatever it is, arbiter, is going to arrive at some kind of deliberation about whether or not he should be suspended, and then what that suspension should be, and implement it. Now, here's the fun part. There's an appeals process to that decision. If it is appealed, it goes to Goodell, and Goodell would have final say on whether or not the suspension as implemented by the committee will be enforced as it was indicated.
Yeah.
So I think the number that I'm hearing from a bunch of different media sources is that it's likely to be an entire season.
Yeah. The last thing I saw was indefinite suspension for a minimum of 1 year.
Right.
And just the addition of the word minimum makes me cringe. When it comes to the Browns and throwing that money and knowing that it might not be just one, it might be two, it might be a season and a half, it might be Michael Vick multi-year, kind of stuff. And that'd be rough on that franchise.
Yep. It would be rough on that franchise considering what they gave up and invested in Deshaun Watson. If he gets suspended for a year, let's say if he appealed the decision, which will automatically happen, right? Unless he's not guilty or whatever,
right?
That seems like a long shot. And then if he is found to be guilty, no matter what they implement as his punishment, he'll appeal it.
Yeah.
And if it gets to Goodell, I think Goodell's just going to say, "Yep, that's whatever the committee said it was going to be."
Yeah, rubber stamp.
Done. We're going to move on, and rubber stamp it. So, it looks more and more like he's going to be out for the entire 2022 season, and that leads to another interesting discussion that we can have at some point, which is Baker Mayfield doesn't appear to be in a position where he's going to play for them in any capacity. Hey, Funky. So if that's the case, they're going with Jacoby Brissett and have no technically a second quarterback on the roster.
Yeah.
So I hate to say it,
for a top 3 pick.
right? That's just it. They're going to implement this punishment on Deshaun Watson, but what could end up happening is that he will have another year off where it's not at least another year of him not getting hit by 300-pound defensive linemen. They might get a top 10, top 5 pick, which they could use to support a player like him coming into his first full season with the team. And they have the most money right now, the most cap relief right now in the NFL, but they can't spend any of it, because if they spend any of it, they don't have that cap room to absorb his $46 million cap hit when it comes to the 2023 season.
Yeah.
So they are cash strapped, but I mean, it might just be like you're prolonging the life of this player in Deshaun Watson. You're probably going to recoup some, even if Baker Mayfield just leaves and signs somewhere else. The contract that he would get would warrant a third round comp pick. So there's every.
Did I see that that the Seattle Seahawks team store accidentally leaked a picture of a Baker Mayfield jersey or something?
So you would have to imagine that
like
a team, any team that is like quote unquote rumored to get him, would have to have merchandise ready to go, right? Like
that's true.
You can't just acquire a player and then be like, well, we're going to have jerseys on the shelf for week 1 in 4 days or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there has to be some lead time. Like a lot of the trades that you heard about during the NFL draft were agreed to weeks in advance, and there's none of that leaked out.
Yeah. I can understand that.
So Cleveland is going through it, but they had to have some idea that something like this was going to happen and that they were going to have to kind of pay this toll, as it were. Yeah. So this season might be a throwaway one for them, but I think they're probably set up pretty well for the following 4. So we'll see what happens with. I'd be surprised if he got more than 1 year.
Yeah.
In actuality.
I would be surprised if he got more than 1 year, but only in that like 60-40, right? Like I think there's a less than 50% chance it'll be longer, but I mean, Mike Vick was out for how many years?
It was a couple. I mean, he was in jail.
Basically, yeah, you're suspended indefinitely, and then you have to come back and beg to come back. And they eventually did, but it was multiple years.
It was part of the, yeah. So, and I would say that dogfighting is less of an egregious offense than what Deshaun Watson is accused of doing. But so we will see. I mean, Calvin Ridley was suspended for an entire season for gambling on his own team. And effectively not, you know, and so like if the NFL is like, we're not going to have Deshaun Watson suspended for 1 year and Calvin Ridley suspended for 1 year and have those be the same, we need to look better for the optics of it. Yeah, that's about the only argument I could really get my teeth into about how it could be more than 1 year.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did. That's a good point. He did settle 20 out of the 24 cases. So, I mean, it would be wouldn't it be kind of hard to punish him if like these are all settled?
I don't know. He's probably not going to make the terms of the settlement public by any means.
Sure.
But if he settled without having to be forced to admit
guilt,
then yeah, I think it would be harder. But at the same time, you know, money can buy silence. So settling, that's one of those things that are like, oh, well, yeah, if you're rich, you don't have to pay your time because you can just buy people off, kind of thing. And right. I don't know if the NFL necessarily wants to go down that path of, oh, well, he settled. There was never a guilt thing, so we're just going to let him free. Oh, that would be just as bad, I think. So okay. I'm not sure settling is actually going to matter to the NFL.
Yeah. And then just before we came on, to change gears slightly, Terry McLaurin, the wide receiver for the Washington Commanders, signed a 3-year, $71 million deal, which makes him the 5th highest paid wide receiver in football. And so I want to share this screen from overthecap.com.
Yep.
Let me know when it's up and you can see it.
It is there.
Is that too big?
Rumble?
Oh, is Rumble in chat? Oh,
awesome. Rumble has entered the chat.
Nice. We've doubled our listenership in just a matter of moments. This is excellent.
Clearly, people want to hear about the wide receiver contract. Let's do it.
Yes, why not? So, like, McLaurin's new deal puts him right between Cooper Kupp and AJ Brown. So he makes a couple $100,000 less than Cooper Kupp, and he makes about $1.2 million more than AJ Brown. So, I wanted to share this as well from Twitter. This is Field Yates, who's over at ESPN. These are the wide receiver deals that happened this offseason. Let's go around the league. Devontae Adams, 5 years, 142. Tyreek Hill, 4 for 120. AJ Brown, 4 for 100. Diggs, 4 years, 96. Kupp, 3 years, 80. McLaurin, 3 years, 71. DJ Moore, 3 years, 60, almost 62. And then both Mike Williams and Chris Godwin, 3 years, 60. Let me just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players. 9 wide receivers this offseason got absolutely ridiculous money. And if you wanted to go back and you wanted to say, like, Adams went from Rodgers to who was the guy in Oakland? David Carr.
Yeah.
Derek Carr. Tyreek Hill. Mahomes to Tua. A.J. Brown. Tannehill to Hurts, right? Stephon Diggs didn't go anywhere. Cooper Kupp didn't go anywhere. McLaurin didn't go anywhere. DJ Moore didn't go anywhere. Neither of these guys went anywhere. But, like, the top 3 guys moved teams.
Yeah.
So I think what this trend is showing is that if you have, especially with the top 2 guys, less so with A.J. Brown, but if you have a top flight quarterback in a second contract, they are going to prioritize spending other places than an elite number 1 wide receiver. And I think that's because you have so many wide receivers coming into the league every year that you can get as either first or second round picks that you don't have to commit this kind of money if you have an elite quarterback. You do have to commit this kind of money if you have a tier 2 quarterback.
Yeah, that actually goes well with our main topic today, which is the accessibility problem.
Right.
But before we get to that, I do want to make one mention.
Sure.
The Minkah Fitzpatrick deal.
Oh, right.
Versus he, I think, became the highest paid safety in the NFL.
$18.2 million. Oh,
18.2 mil. That is still only 67% of what this deal was, and he is the 5th highest paid. Basically, Minka's deal as the number 1 safety is the equivalent, is actually less than the 5th highest paid wide receiver.
Right. So
Minka's deal was much bigger than number 2 at safety, right?
So Jamal Adams had 17.5. So, like, Minkah is getting $750,000 a year more. So a little less than $1 million a year more than the next highest paid safety. But I mean, like, comparatively, that's kind of a lot of money. And then, like, for wide receivers, he would be somewhere between paid the amount of money that Michael Thomas and Christian Kirk are making on their deals, if you wanted to compare it on a dollar to dollar ratio. But, like, you can have the highest paid wide receiver in the league, but you have to, like, the thing that I think that you would have to, like, have a discussion about is, are we willing to have the highest paid / best safety in the league, or are we willing to have a top flight number 2 wide receiver on the team if you're talking about handing out a second contract?
Yeah.
So I know my answer there is I would rather have the number 2 wide receiver if on a second contract than the highest paid safety in the league, because they're just infinitely more valuable.
Yep. So I just found that is interesting that the highest paid safety is nowhere near what wide receivers are gathering. And it kind of goes back to that early stream that we had where we talked about that positions of importance, positions that matter kind of thing. And they put their money where there's the value. And clearly quarterbacks, wide receivers have significantly more value than safety and running back and some of those others.
Right, exactly. And so, like, if you think about the Pittsburgh Steelers, they have the highest paid edge rusher in the league in TJ Watt. They have the highest paid safety in the league in Minkah Fitzpatrick. And then, not to mention, like, they're paying Cam Hayward. And so, like, they have clearly, their philosophy is that we are going to pay people to be elite prospects on defense. And if you look at their offense, Kenny Pickett's a rookie. Najee Harris is a rookie. Like, their wide receiving core is coming due for their second contracts.
Yep.
And if it's like keeping Minkah Fitzpatrick or Deontay Johnson, like, and you let Deontay Johnson walk, like, that's a problem. Now, I think that they're a team kind of like Cincinnati, in that they're going to use their draft capital to invest in their offense, and they're going to use their free agency dollars to invest in their defense. I don't know that their investment needs to be this heavy, but I mean, they do have a pretty good defense.
Yeah. So I guess let's move into kind of the main topic, the accessibility problem.
Right.
Do you want me to kind of give like a quick overview of kind of what that means, or do you want to kind of talk about that?
Well, I'm excited that you seem to be excited about it, so I want you to do it.
All right. So to be honest, it was nothing that I had actually thought about until you had brought it up to me a month or two ago. And you said, have you ever noticed ... right? Have you ever noticed that left tackles you don't find them, the elite left tackles, you don't find them in free agency?
Right.
Have you noticed that you don't find the top 3, top 5 quarterbacks in free agents? Now, granted, it's changed a little bit, and that's probably something we'll talk about, but you don't find those really elite things at these top 5 positions very often. Right. And that's where drafting comes in part, right? So that's kind of the problem, how you get some of these really critical positions when they're just not available.
Right, exactly. And that was a very succinct way to put it. I like the way that you did that. So what I would say is that these two ideas or theories speak to how we should invest draft capital. So when you look at these things individually, I think it's pretty easy to dismiss them all individually. But when you start to see how the Venn diagrams overlap, that's when I think that you start to see the value of approaching roster construction from this particular angle. And once again, I'm not saying to exclude any other point of view, but I'm saying that this would be the primary way that you would look to put together a roster. So I want to read this sentence. So this is from overthecap.com back in April by the site's creator, Jason Fitzgerald, who wrote a couple of really good books about how the NFL is a marketplace first and how you should approach it as an economic marketplace. Pretty interesting stuff to me, at least, but I'm a nerd. So he says to calculate this idea of like roster construction by maximizing positional value, to calculate, I used our projections for the 4-year cost of the number 16th pick in the draft and compared it to the cost of the 10th highest paid player at a position. So talk about cornerbacks. You go and look at the 10th highest paid corner in the league, compare that to what you would pay the 16th overall pick. So right in the middle of the first round in any draft year, right?
Right.
And so he did this going back to 2017 for the top 20 picks at every position or position group as they define it. Like interior defensive line could be nose tackle, defensive tackle as well. Same thing with like interior offensive linemen. So it depends on how you define some of these positions. I will say that there's some wiggle room there. This is important because while the draft always gives a team access to low-cost talent, the spread between a free agent value and a draft slot varies greatly by position to position. Every dollar saved in the draft gives a team more money to spend on the rest of the roster to better or improve the team. And here are how the numbers have worked out in the last 5 years. So basically this chart is the salary cap benefit of drafting a player at their relative position. And these values are in millions of dollars. And then here on this other axis, we have the percentage of top 20 veterans acquired via free agency. So when you plot these data points, we get this idea of who is accessible to add to your team in free agency. And then if you understand what you can get in free agency versus to what you need to go get in the draft, you start to be able to differentiate these positions, not only by investment in like a capital, like a draft pick, but also in cold hard cash.
Yep.
So up here, it says the teams in the bottom right quadrant should be premium positions to draft. So let's take a look at those positions. Quarterback, wide receiver, edge rusher, left tackle, and interior defensive lineman. Okay. And we might look at how the Lions have drafted these positions early in the 2 drafts in the Brad Holmes era. QB has obviously the highest value, and I think it would put a wide receiver as the second most valuable. Edge, left tackle, and interior defensive lineman. You can kind of quibble over what you feel is the most important positions there, because they're all kind of nicely grouped up to here in this little section by themselves.
Right.
What I found interesting about this chart, and you can see this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is that cornerback is over here. So of the 5 position groups that you can get in free agency, like this line across the middle here, if you're above this line, you're effectively accessible in free agency. And if you are below this line, you are effectively less accessible in free agency. So that's kind of the point of demarcation. So I thought it was pretty interesting that such a high percentage of top 20, the most highly paid cornerbacks in free agency, are actually making it to the market. And to kind of prove that point a little bit, I looked up just this last year which cornerbacks changed teams and how they were ranked by their current APY. So we have James Bradbury went from the Giants to the Eagles, Stephon Gilmore, Kyle Fuller switched teams, Bryce Callahan switched teams, Darius Williams from your beloved Rams.
Hey, I'm a Lions fan. Come on, beloved.
Travarius Ward, JC Jackson, and that's right around 20 guys. Like we had 5 or 6 players who reached the marketplace who switched teams as cornerbacks. So what that tells me is that if I'm going into an off season, I might want to look at what the cornerback market is going to be like. Because if I'm looking at, I'll know where I'm drafting, and I'll know roughly by either my internal draft board or like the consensus board that's put out into the media, who might be available at that position at my picks, in multiple early rounds.
Right.
So if I know that there is a cornerback on the free agent market that I could sign for 10, 11, 12 million dollars a year, like a Darius Williams from the Rams, what he got from Jacksonville, I might say to myself, if I invest $12 million here, and then I use my second round pick on a wide receiver, I'm actually saving something like 16 or 17 million dollars if that wide receiver works out. And why wouldn't we? We're investing a draft pick in him. We think that he will work out.
Right.
Okay, so what is the most effective use of my money and my draft capital? So do I want to, like, if you just reverse this?
So kind of money is what you spend on above the line, and draft capital is what you spend on below the line.
Right, exactly.
At least for new acquisitions. Obviously, quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, for example, when his contract comes due, they're not going to go, well, you're below the line, so we're going to draft, right? I mean,
Right.
Obviously, you're keeping the elite talent, but when you're going to find elite talent, above is where you pay, below is where you draft.
Right. Exactly. And so, and this is not a perfect understanding of this idea.
Yeah.
But like, it's enough to give you an idea of how to approach, like if you were the GM of a team or what have you, right? If you were to go out into the market and say, I want to sign a wide receiver on a second contract, well, we just saw almost 10 wide receivers that are making north of $20 million a year. And only a couple of them actually entered the marketplace. Most of them were trades, and others were just teams re-signing their own guys.
Yeah.
So that's why wide receivers down here is because you don't have the option to go do that. You can't go into free agency and get a cornerback like a Darius Williams. You can do that if it's a corner, but you can't do that if it's like an equivalent player at the wide receiver position. So
go ahead. You go on.
No, please.
I'll say there's 2 things that I'm thinking as I'm looking at this. Number one, under that line is harder to harder to acquire, right? And above the line is easier to acquire.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised to find running back below that line. So I started thinking about that, and I'm like, okay, why is running back hard to acquire? And I think what I've decided is it's not that they're hard to acquire, they're not worth acquiring.
Correct.
Right? And that
Correct.
linebacker, the same thing. I'm like, why is that bottom left quadrant? I mean, you can get linebackers. It comes down to they're not worth it. That bottom left quadrant is not worth signing.
That's right.
Draft that, right?
So like, okay, so the way that I would kind of break it down is that like these two positions are the least valuable positions in football as the NFL stands right now, as far as like what you should invest in them. What this is saying is don't invest a lot of money and don't invest a lot of draft capital in either of these two positions.
Yeah.
Because they are incredibly accessible and they're incredibly cheap.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of supply and not a lot of demand.
Yep.
Now, all of these other positions here in this upper left-hand quadrant, there is value to be found in having people at these positions, like Frank Ragnow as a center, Penei Sewell as a right tackle, TJ Hawkinson, is our tight end. But like when I say the Lions should not invest a second contract in TJ Hawkinson, this is what I mean. Because last week you and I looked at CBS's rankings of like the tight end position group, and they ranked him 8th overall in the NFL.
Yeah.
But like if it is cheap and easy to acquire a tight end, why would you give top line money to any of these positions? Right? Yeah. So like because they're accessible to you. They are less accessible than running backs and linebackers, but that's like finding a penny on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
So if we are going to approach a draft, I think the first thing that you should do is if you're going to look at the draft from this position, from like this philosophy, you have to say to yourself, quarterback is virtually, if we are going to find the biggest bang for our buck, this is the only choice. It's the outlier that sets us up. And if you look at teams that are doing really well right now in the NFL who are ascending, they've hit on quarterbacks. The Bengals, the Chargers, the Chiefs, the Bills. They have all hit on first round quarterbacks and then have parlayed the savings on that rookie deal for those quarterbacks to flesh out the rest of their rosters. And then when it came time to pay those quarterbacks their second contract, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, now the challenge is, how do we have solved this problem? How do we support this guy to keep our championship window open? Well, let's try and sign cornerbacks in the free agent market, and maybe that allows you enough flexibility to say we're going to spend a second or third round pick on like a good corner that we think fits our system well.
Yeah.
But like we are going to spend our draft capital on getting to the passer, protecting our passer, and giving our passer weapons. And that's how you should assign your draft capital early in each draft, because most of those guys that you pick, even the best teams in the NFL when it comes to drafting, miss on players. The players don't work out. They're hurt like Jeff Okudah, or they're just not talented, or they have some problem like, what was it, Titus Young a couple of years ago for the Lions? Like they drafted him, I think, in the second round, and he just
I think he
had issues. Right. And so like, and he cost himself a position in the NFL because he had problems, right? Or I'm not sure what his situation was exactly, but he was a guy with a lot of talent. The Lions invested in him, and then there was an issue that prevented him from playing. That's all. That's the only point I'm trying to make. So
he was a second round pick, 44th in 2011.
And that's a fine place to draft a wide receiver. But you only get the value if you hit on the player, right? We are not talking about minimizing loss here. We're talking about maximizing value. So if Titus Young had worked out, he's a great pick because of where you took him, of what you invested in him. But so if you look at what the Lions have done under Brad Holmes in their first two drafts, they went Penei Sewell, but they drafted him as a left tackle, right? Turns out he's playing right tackle. So, but they have a quality left tackle on the books. Then they went on Wuzurike McNeil. Then they drafted Melifonwu, and then they drafted Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then they took Derek Barnes and Jefferson, Jamar Jefferson. So here.
I was excited about Jefferson. He was a really late pick and thought he had a lot of potential, and he just couldn't quite do anything with it. I mean, he did have a ton of opportunity, but when he did, he was.
That's okay because they found Corey Reynolds, dude off the street, right? Or Craig Reynolds, or whatever his name is. So then you go to this last year's draft, just a couple months ago, and you go Aiden Hutchinson, you go Jameson Williams. Pascal is somewhere between these two positions, and then you get Kirby Joseph, James Mitchell, and then you go Rodriguez, Houston, you might also consider an edge, and then Chase Lucas. So if you look at how just by this list, Brad Holmes is drafting, he is like here and over with a couple dip my toes in the later round, depending on how you want to look at Penei Sewell, whether they drafted him to be the left tackle of the future or how he was going to fit in, because he's a pretty high quality right tackle, but you can find those guys on the open market. And I don't think that they would have taken him at 7 if they thought that he was solely going to be a right tackle.
So I disagree just a touch, only because I think for a lot of years, left tackle, because right-handed quarterback, that's the blind side, is coming from the left. But I think over the last 5-6 years, those edge rushers, the guy that would sit on the left side and try to attack the blind side, they're moving all over the place. And that right tackle at this point,
right,
is doing the same thing as the left tackle. So
yes,
I think you're going to find just a T instead of an LT RT in these going forward, because it doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right. You still have to stop guys like Bosa and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so I only disagree in that right and left are essentially the same, and I don't think that they would go, well, he's a right tackle, but so we're not going to draft him. They're going to be like, this is a tackle. It's one of the most important things that we can do is protect our quarterback coming from either side. We're going to take him either way.
Yeah, so I agree, right? So the whole Lawrence Taylor was such a dominant pass rusher coming off of the blind side that this idea of the left tackle has evolved into being one of the most important offensive positions. And then, well, what happens when you take Lawrence Taylor and you put him on the other side?
Yeah.
Right. To your point, and so it's if you need to block Lawrence Taylor and he's just going to, destroy your right tackle, now you have a need at right tackle.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons why Aaron Donald has been as dominant as he is, and this is a small percentage of the reason why Aaron Donald is so dominant, is that the line that he has to go from where he lines up at the snap to the quarterback is shorter than an edge rusher. And he is more physically dominant and smarter and a better technician than most interior offensive linemen in the league. And when you combine the fact that, hey, I can get past you, to I'm just going to blow right through you, and I have a shorter distance to go. Now, if you're in the NFC West, you're like, I might put a higher premium on a guard because I need to be able to at least slow this dude down by a half a second.
Yeah, and that's what he opens up the lanes for everybody else. I mean, when he goes in, he'll take 2 guys, sometimes 3 guys, which means you've got your other edge rushers, your other defensive ends and and whatnot are getting through because a couple of guys are focused on the beast that is Aaron Donald.
So Funky in the chat has said something here that I want to touch on real quickly because I wasn't able to pay attention to the chat while I was sharing my screen.
Yeah.
He says, honestly, I think talent drives the money in every other position besides quarterback, safety, tight end, and off-ball linebacker. Elite talent coming up for deals every year, so no one drives the market up, just a thought. And so one of the things that Field Yates said on his Twitter feed after he posted that list of wide receivers and the contracts they got this offseason is the winner of all of these deals this year is Justin Jefferson, who's going into year 3 of his rookie deal, because by the time that dude is going to be in contract talks in year 4 with the Vikings, he's going to ask for $35 million. It'll be
35
tier 2 quarterback money, and the sad part of that affair is that they're going to have to give it to him.
Yeah.
Because that guy, he might be my favorite wide receiver in the entire NFL. I am so incredibly high on Justin Jefferson. He is unguardable.
Yeah.
So to bring this back to previous conversations that we have had, when it comes to Lions players who are coming up for their second contracts, we have players like Amani Araraway, who Mike talked about today. We have players like TJ Hawkinson, DeAndre Swift. And when I look at an article like what Over the Cap has put out that shows where you can acquire talent that can arguably be compared to top of the market talent, and you do not need to spend a first or second round pick in order to acquire that talent, I think to myself, if I can go get that in the draft and I can get it in the mid rounds, and I can continue to invest in higher valuable positions, I should do that. And so the last thing that we're going to do today is talk about a 2023 mock draft that was put out by a new draft analyst at ESPN, Matt Miller.
Oh God, I thought you said Matt Millen and I wanted to crush you.
I will never use Matt Millen as anything positive to do with roster construction. He's the reason why I got interested in this, because it was it can't be this hard to make a good football team.
All right? We can still be friends.
Right. No. Yeah. It's only one letter off, but still an absolutely terrible point of view. Actually, it's terrible for me because as a Michigan fan, he called games for Michigan. And I was like, you have to be kidding me. I have to listen to this guy continue to talk about football and in the context of my favorite football team ever. It's not fair.
After he ruined your favorite professional football team, why do you think he knows what he's talking about?
So here's the way that I think that Matt Millen really ruined the Detroit Lions. Okay. I don't care as much about drafting three wide receivers in consecutive drafts. Those guys didn't work out, except maybe Roy Williams, right? And who was a competent NFL wide receiver.
Yeah.
And he certainly got a return for Roy Williams, or Martin Mayhew did, that made up for where he was drafted, right?
Yep.
I think it was a first, a third, and a seventh that they got for Roy Williams.
You have a great memory.
So, but the problem was that he was drafting guys like Jordan Dizon and Titus Young, guys who did not work out. The roster turnover on the Detroit Lions was unparalleled in the NFL. And it's that's the problem, because now you're forced to go to free agency. Now you're forced to give guys second contracts in order to have competent players on your roster. So how is that? I mean, the Jacksonville Jaguars were just raked over the coals because they spent all this money on tier 2 NFL talent, and they're paying them tier 1 NFL talent this offseason. And they're not adhering to this idea of positional value. You don't trade up from 33 and spend twice what that draft pick is worth in order to take that kid from Utah, Devin Lloyd, at linebacker, when you had already signed one into free agency to a huge deal, and then draft the Muma from Wyoming in round 3. Are you going to run a 4-3 defense? Go ahead and do that in today's NFL and have a slot receiver lined up on Chad Muma. Go ahead. Have fun losing football games. Like, that's a terrible idea. Trent Baalke is going to get fired. I'm worried for Trevor Lawrence because I don't think that dude deserves Trevor Baalke. So this idea of like, where do you invest capital versus where do you spend your dollars? Well, if you invest your capital intelligently, you will have more dollars to invest. So like, there was this interesting article that was posted in one of the Facebook groups that you and I are in about like the dead money analysis. The Detroit Lions carried over from 2020 to 2021. And most of that dead money was from the Matthew Stafford trade.
Yep.
So that's no good. So, yeah. The second round linebacker thing is the one that really gets me.
Yeah, and I threw a link in there, the 10 worst draft picks of the Matt Millen era. If anybody wants to check it out, it's
10 most recent. Yeah,
it is 10 Jordan Dizon, linebacker, Boss Bailey, outside linebacker, Kalimba Edwards, defensive end, Drew Stanton, quarterback, Jeff Backus, which I'm kind of surprised at that one because he was actually a serviceable left tackle.
Yeah, for multiple teams.
Linebacker, Sean Cody, defensive tackle, Joey Harrington, a big miss on quarterback, then Charles Rogers and Mike Williams. We got a lot of linebackers in there.
I mean, like I hear enough opinion on the Detroit Lions on how to construct this roster from like Lion fan bases that it's like, we need to go.
Oh,
I'll answer that here in a second because I have an idea on this.
That's a great question.
It is a great question. What was I saying? Because now I'm thinking about this other thing that you just said.
I don't know. I was reading his question while you were talking.
All right, well, let's just go to the question because he just completely derailed my train of thought. So here's what I would give up. If Trevor Lawrence says, if you go, let's say Jacksonville has like a 5 or 6 win season, they miss the playoffs. There's going to be more turnover in the coaching staff, and Trevor Lawrence is just like, hey, shit, I can remove them from my Instagram account and like force this issue. He firmly tells management, I'm not re-signing. Right? Trade me. I will not play. It would have to be something like that. Like, I'm not going to take part in activities. I'm not going to play in games. I'm done. You have to trade me. If they were like, okay, we're going to put Trevor Lawrence on the trade block. We're going to canvass the NFL. What would you trade for Trevor Lawrence? If it was, say it was today, or I guess technically we're setting this up for after the season, right? So if it happens before the draft, I would trade both first-round picks this year. I would trade a first-round pick next year, and I might trade some combination of second and third-round picks. Like, I think that the foundation that the Lions have built through 2 years is pretty solid. There are certainly weak spots in the thing. But if you're telling me I can get the number 1 overall pick from 2 seasons ago at quarterback who's been in a terrible situation, that's worth a God offer. And if I was Detroit, I'd pay it. Because
I'm not as sold on Trevor Lawrence. Granted, he's in a terrible position. What's that?
But who would you be more sold on as a rookie in a draft class than Trevor Lawrence? Are you more sold on Will Levis or Bryce Young than Trevor Lawrence?
I don't know. I'd have to see how he does in year 2, to be honest. Because year 1, he was, like you said, he's in a bad situation on a bad team, and he was bad. He was really bad.
Yes.
So he needs to show improvement. Or I'd say no. I'd rather take my chances on, Bryce or one of these guys coming out than that if he shows no improvement.
But I mean, so when I think about all the talk that I've heard, whether it's from the Lions or the fan base about Jared Goff and how he's confident again, and like all these things, like Ben Johnson's going to make Jared Goff better. The wide receiver group is going to make Jared Goff better. The O-line being healthy to start the season is going to make Jared Goff better. I think to myself, none of those things are intrinsic to Jared Goff. And if they're going to make a quarterback better, let me get one with some better talent intrinsically to that player. And so whether it's Trevor Lawrence or Kyler Murray or what is this?
This was quarterback efficiency last year.
Well, there's Goff right in the middle at the bottom.
Well, way under the line, right in the middle. But
Right.
Lawrence is slightly above line, but way at the back. So you got your second-year guys, first-year guys, Wilson, Lawrence, Fields, Mills. Like, not all of them are bad. Now, granted, they're all on bad teams. That's why they're drafted in the top 10, right? So I don't know. I would have to see improvement from him to trade that much away when if he still remains in this area. I don't think I'd do it. I'd rather take a flyer on one of these other upcoming potential studs, because I think after 2 years, you kind of get a feel of what someone can and can't. Now, granted, you're not going to see the ceiling for sure, but I think you can get a picture of what their trajectory might be.
Can you?
And
can you go back multiple seasons and look at quarterback efficiency on this chart?
This one is, I don't know where they got this one.
Because what I would like to see is where Josh Allen ranked on this chart after his second year in the NFL.
What happened here? Sorry.
And that's only one example.
Yeah.
Right. But like it was year 3 that Josh Allen became how we refer and talk about Josh Allen now.
Yeah.
He's now elite. He's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. But in his first 2 years, he was not. And like the same could be said for any projected quarterback in any particular draft class.
Yeah, and I get that, but I would definitely be leery if 5% less than expected completion.
With Urban Meyer coaching that team.
It's bad. So, but he's on a bad team, right? So you have to take some of that into consideration. So it is.
Let me phrase it to you a little bit differently, right? So Jacksonville has Trevor Baalke and Urban Meyer as their quote unquote front office or whatever, right? Like their decision makers. They draft Trevor Lawrence. He has this year that you're referencing, right? They fire Urban Meyer. Trent Baalke has another terrible draft class where he doesn't support Trevor Lawrence and spends their cap space on, outside of Brandon Scherf, what I would consider to be risky players,
right?
Unproven players. Compare that to what Detroit has done in the same amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Stable front office, stable coaching staff. The only thing that you could say about the coaching staff is that Anthony Lynn was relieved of play calling duties and the team got better. Right? So an improvement. And now add Trevor Lawrence to that with 2 years left to go on his rookie deal.
I would rather probably go after a guy like Garoppolo.
You're kidding me. You want to pay Jimmy Garoppolo $25 million if you were just paying to pay what he's worth this year.
Right.
You want to pay Jimmy Garoppolo $25 million when you're going to pay Trevor Lawrence $25 million over the next 2 seasons to be like, efficiency is all well and good, but efficiency is not talent.
No, I get it. I'm just
Jimmy
saying,
Garoppolo is not as talented a quarterback as Trevor Lawrence. He might be a more efficient quarterback than Trevor Lawrence right now after Trevor Lawrence's rookie season.
I'd have to see Lawrence actually prove that he's got that talent.
How is he supposed to do that?
I know. That's the hard part. That's
how is Justin Fields supposed to do that? How is Zach Wilson supposed to? How is Sam Darnold or Daniel Jones supposed to do that when their teams are so poorly mismanaged, have such big turnover, and invest their resources around them poorly?
So I get all that, right? So for me, like when you were talking about, I'd give up both of this year's first rounders and next year's first rounder and a third or whatever it was that you mentioned. I would not put that on a guy like Lawrence if he has another year like he had this past year. I think that's too much to put to. Essentially, they haven't been able to prove that they are franchise quarterbacks. It's only been 1 year, right? So the assumption is year 2 is the same as year 1, and there's no improvement. They've now got 2 years. They've not proven anything when it comes to a franchise quarterback capability. Yes, they're on bad, mismanaged teams. I wouldn't throw that many draft picks. I would, if I'm going to just roll the dice, I'd rather roll the dice on a brand new guy.
So I do think there's
5 years instead of 2 years of cheap, right?
Right. So I think there's value there. So that's a nice segue. Let's go to this mock draft and talk about it a little bit more, like from a different perspective. Okay.
Right on.
So I'm going to share my screen.
And I'm going to leave remove mine, add yours.
So this is one of the first mock drafts that I have seen for 2023. Okay. Now, most of the mock drafts that I have seen for 2023 rank teams in order of how likely it is for them to win the Super Bowl based on a sports book, which a lot of sports book have the Lions ranked like, say, third worst in the NFL. This mock is based upon ESPN's football power index, which is better than, I would say, the sports book when it comes to estimating who's going to be the worst team in the NFL. I don't think this is perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's better than what we have seen already for 2023 mock drafts. Okay.
Yep.
Jets, Bears. I think this is a contender for the number 1 overall pick. Texans, Jags, Falcons. These are all teams I expect to be there. This is interesting. Pittsburgh Steelers, Carolina Panthers.
Situation.
What?
It's a quarterback situation.
Right. Exactly. Carolina, Detroit. Now, this is bullshit because there's no way that Seattle is better than Detroit, right? So I tend to think that the Lions will be closer to like 10, 11, 12 than say this. Because like if we look at like Giants, now this is the team that I think is probably in line with where Detroit is talent-wise. Washington, Miami, I think those are closer comparisons than say New York and Seattle. But if you get Will Levis at 8, if this is where you fell, this is what I think your position would be jumping up and down for.
Yeah.
So like Levis is a team captain. The Detroit Lions draft lots of team captains. And then like, tell me if this sounds familiar at all. 6'3", 230, great arm strength, gunslinger style of play. Sound like anybody we might know?
Yep.
Right. And if Detroit is going to get whoever their non-Jared Goff quarterback is going to be, that guy has only one requirement as far as I am concerned. And that is the number one thing that I need from that guy is his ability to push the ball down the field.
Yep.
Because Jameson Williams, DJ Chark is very fast. You know, I think that, and to be honest, I think that they're probably likely to add another wide receiver early before they're quote unquote all done rounding out the team. But I would be thrilled if you told me right now, assuming that Will Levis does not get hurt this upcoming season in college football, that you could get Will Levis at the 8th overall pick. I'd be freaking stoked.
Right. So kind of going back to your question, and I'm not sure who else they've got us pegged to get at the end of the first round.
Oh, we're going to talk about that.
All right. But once we get there, I would like you to answer the question on the Trevor Lawrence thing.
Yeah.
You give up both first rounds this year, a third, and next year's first or whatever. The question is, would you trade Will Levis, whoever they pick for us at, I don't know, somewhere between 20 and 32 probably, depending on how the Rams do.
Right.
Next year's first for Trevor Lawrence. So I'll be curious to see what your thoughts are once we kind of do a quick rundown of the different picks.
The other guy that I like coming out of this class is Tyler Van Dyke, and this is for this reason and this reason only: arm strength and mobility. Coach everything else, but you can't teach.
He's from the real U of M. He's from the real U of M.
Okay, I know you're a Miami fan, so I'm going to let that one slide. The real U of M. Ridiculous. So they have the Lions' second pick in the draft here. So effectively, the Rams make the NFC Conference Championship, right? And they have them taking a wide receiver from Alabama. And I don't know anything about this kid right now. He transferred from Georgia. That's another outstanding program. He's gonna have a meaningful role in Alabama's offense this upcoming season. They don't say much about him. He averaged 17 yards a catch and 8 TDs over 2 seasons. Well, I like both of those things in college football, but I want to see him play this year,
Yeah.
But I like the position. Like, this would say to me, if you're doing this, like, you're not re-signing DJ Chark. Okay. I mean, like, nothing against DJ Chark, but like, I'd rather have a rookie wide receiver that does effectively the same thing that you do on a rookie contract.
I could see them potentially re-signing Chark, but none of the other chaff, right? The who's the guy we signed off the streets that everybody liked, Reynolds? Like, he'd be gone.
I don't understand the love for that guy. I just don't get it.
St. Brown, Williams, Chark, and Burton would be probably the best, assuming Williams does what we think he can do, will probably be the best wide receiver group in the league.
Well, I mean, like, I would even just kind of tone that down a little bit. It would certainly be the best skill position group in the NFC North. And then, like, assuming that you hit on Levis or you even kept Jared Goff, like, that should be enough to win the North, because you're talking about having these guys still being on rookie deals, especially if the 2023 draft works out like this for the Lions.
Mm-hmm.
Like, now you're talking about, like, these guys are all hitting their prime right as Aaron Rodgers retires, right? So the NFC North should be there for the
taking. Hold on just a touch. Who is it that they claim is going to get to the Super Bowl
this year?
No, this year.
I think the betting money.
Wrong one.
I think, like, the betting money was Buffalo, Tampa Bay to start the season, before the season started.
Who did they have on yours as 31 and 32 picks?
Oh, in that article, Buffalo and Green Bay. I don't see Green Bay making the Super Bowl with their skill position group.
Rodgers would have to win a playoff game. He'd have to win 2 playoff games in the same year.
Yeah, and that's tough. That's difficult. And that's assuming that they get the number 1 overall seed in the NFC.
Yeah.
Because there's only one bye now in each conference.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it would be tough. But, like, Funky says, wide receiver, I don't know if that's the position we need. I'm still questioning what the defense will look like. So, like, this is the key, I think, question for the Detroit Lions fan base. So I think that they made a big investment in the defensive line, and you have at least two young linebackers. We don't know what Malcolm Rodriguez is going to be. Derek Barnes certainly failed to impress in his first season, right? So, like, that's certainly not done by any stretch of the imagination. After the season, Amani Araraway is up for his second contract. You have to make a decision on Jeff Okudah's 5th-year option. You've already re-signed Tracy Walker, and he's on the books. You did draft a safety in Kirby Joseph, who I'm betting is going to end up being a starter at some point this year. And the rest of the cornerback room looks like what it looks like. Mike Hughes is on a 1-year deal. I certainly feel that there's investment to be made in the back 7 of this defense. However, I don't think that those need to be 1st and 2nd round picks in order to be good investments at those positions.
Yeah, so we're going to still have 2nd and 3rd round picks, even outside of picking that quarterback and that wide receiver.
Right. There is no reason to believe.
Yeah, and then quarterback is also very accessible, as we saw previously, right? That we could find.
And the Lions are going to have cap room. So, I mean, like, I think you could start trying, unless he gets seriously hurt or traded, even if they don't have a QB in the first. Okay. I mean, if that's the case, that's a real shame as far as I'm concerned. Because Jared Goff is just not good enough. He's a starter in the NFL for somebody. I just don't want him to be the starter on my team. And I have a hard time believing there's NFL teams out there that's like, we want to go to war with Jared Goff.
Right.
And that's the point of all this. The point of all this is to say your roster construction's never really done. So how do you keep investing in order to allow yourself the greatest flexibility in order to continue to make improvements? So yeah, wide receiver might not be the singular greatest need on the team, but it's a better position to invest in with a premium draft pick than it is to say linebacker or safety, because the return that you get on hitting on a player at the wide receiver position is so much greater than those other two positions that they have to be top 10 players in their position groups in order to be anywhere near approaching the value of what that pick could otherwise be. So I mean, I hate to say it, but there's like, especially if you have solved the quarterback issue, there's really only like 4 positions that you should ever really consider drafting in the first round. And like, you always hear like the unicorn talk, like Quentin Nelson is a unicorn. Yeah, he is. But like, is Kyle Pitts? I don't know. I mean, like, he certainly has the athleticism and like measurables to be one. Is he one though? I don't know. Like, I don't think that that's something that you learn in the first year.
Yeah.
But you certainly have to invest in him as if he is that thing. So my position is continue to load up at these positions that have proven value and how the NFL has demonstrated that how they are going to spend their money in the offseason. Well, that's what he effectively is. He's a slot wide receiver. I mean, he's not going to line up in line and block. But yeah, you're right. He's effectively a giant slot receiver.
Yeah.
Who's going to get paid like a tight end?
Into last year's draft is they're listing him as a tight end, but think of him as just a pass catcher.
Right. And we have talked about on this podcast, or at least on our older version of the podcast, like, would the Falcons have been better off taking Jamar Chase and signing a top 10 or top 5 tight end on the market? Well, we know that a tight end position is available on that market, and a top 5 or 10 or 20 wide receiver is going to cost you $25 million now. So is it smart that the Atlanta Falcons drafted a tight end in the top 5 only if he produces like a wide receiver? Because then you can say he's really a tight end. We're getting wide receiver production at a tight end, and we're going to pay him like a tight end. Some tight end someday is going to win the arbitration between what I'm really used as. I'm not a tight end. Like, they're calling me that so they can save money, but I'm a wide receiver and you need to pay me like I'm a wide receiver. That's how you use me. And if we get a second CBA, I guarantee you that there's going to be language in there on the player side of like, we need a different way to evaluate how we are viewed as a part of the offense or a part of the defense.
So, Drew, real quick, because I know we wanted to try to end at 8 and we're at 8:03.
Yep.
2 quick questions, or 1 quick question and 1 quick note.
Sure.
Quick question. Would you trade Will Levis, the wide receiver, next year's first and this year's third for Trevor Lawrence?
Yes, I would.
You would?
I would.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a lot of players for one player. And is Trevor Lawrence that much better than Will Levis, that he's worth?
I think so, yes.
Essentially another 2 first-round quality players and a third-round quality player.
The primary reason why I'm saying yes is 2 things. First of all, players in that particular situation that we've hypothesized simply don't end up on the market ever.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that one did means that you should take that seriously. So secondly, of all the players that we've hypothesized are going to go into that trade, you're probably missing on half of them. Right? So like, if I apply Los Angeles Rams thinking to this, even though Trevor Lawrence, even after maybe year 2, has not proven that he is going to be quote unquote a franchise quarterback, I think that you would have to quote unquote bet on the upside of a player like him. And if I was going to compare the player he was coming out of Clemson to the player that Will Levis is coming out of Kentucky, it makes my choice really simple. Like Clemson and Kentucky are not the same program.
Yeah, that's true.
So to me, yes, you are going to have to give up capital to acquire a player in his circumstance, regardless of how good he is.
Yeah.
So if I'm Detroit and I'm satisfied with my culture and my foundation, and I have a chance to acquire Trevor Lawrence and add him to that, I would do it. I would do it.
Yeah. It shows your team that you're wanting to do everything possible to get better and become a champion too, right? Like, I'm giving up all this capital because this guy is going to make us a winner.
And like you would be saving some money. And like the one thing that we didn't talk about that I'll just mention extremely quickly is that like if Detroit hits on a lot of these guys, like an above average percentage of these draft picks, like that is going to eat into their salary cap in 2 or 3 years in an unbelievably deep way.
Yeah.
And like when I think about Swift, Hawkinson, Araraway, I think like I cannot pay these guys and expect to keep the guys that I drafted.
Yeah.
And this organization didn't draft those guys.
Yeah. So the one thing that I was, as you were kind of talking there, I was flipping through. I'm going to share my screen real quick.
Yep.
And since this was talking a bit about what we talked about earlier.
Oh my gosh.
6 more women could potentially file lawsuits against Deshaun Watson.
Well, from what I understand, there's no, like, if he settles these 24 cases, that does nothing to prevent more people who are in the same situation, up to 66 potential people, from filing civil lawsuits against him. And like, if he's demonstrating that he's willing to settle, even if I don't want my name in the papers and I want a payday, what is the downside for me now?
I can always change my name. It's a free process down at the government, right?
You know, I mean, like, I'm not saying that there are just people out here gold digging, but I am saying like if I felt like I was wronged by him and I have some method to now realistically improve my life by this influx of money, I don't know why I wouldn't do it.
Right. So anyway, I just happened to notice that as I was kind of flipping through, looking for some other stuff that we were talking on quarterbacks and whatnot. And I'm like, ooh, that was what we were talking about earlier. And that could certainly have an effect on, is it 1 year? Is it more than a year? Is it indefinite? Ouch.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be more than I originally thought it would. So yeah. I thought 8 games would be probably what he got, but it doesn't sound like that's what he's going to get. Mike, I'm sure we're going to talk about these ideas in a future episode. We're going to continue to tie these ideas together into one more cohesive philosophy, and through the lens of the Detroit Lions. So we stream Tuesdays at 7. We're super appreciative to everybody's in the chat, and maybe at some point we'll have to have just a Q&A session with the people in the chat. Like, you ask us questions, they're about football, we tell you what we think, have this nice little back and forth.
Yeah, I like it. There are ways we can pop other people on video too and have just kind of a town hall type of thing. So that might be something we do in the future as well.
Okay, cool.
But, like, comment, subscribe, do all the things that everybody else tells you to do for their streams as well. And if you have any questions, have any topics that you want us to address, casualgmpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll answer questions on air. We'll get topics scheduled, and we'll keep talking football one way or the other.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everybody. Take care, Drew.
You too.
Bye-bye.